Welcome everyone. I was planning on moving forward with the Commodore 64, but instead, let's take a step back and talk about its predecessor. Getting to know the VIC-20 is important for understanding the story behind the company, the tech, and the whole scene that made the C64 as we know it. If you're not interested in the history, I recommend skipping ahead to the unboxing and technical sections. Before the VIC-20 was released, Commodore focused primarily on the business and office market. This shift to targeting home users represented a significant change for the company. However, internally the transition was far from smooth. Rather than a meticulously planned strategy, the situation resembled a complex and often humorous series of events. Some individuals faced setbacks, others navigated with incomplete information, and still others strategically pursued their objectives. In this video I provide only an overview. For a more in-depth understanding, I highly recommend Brian Bagnall's book, Commodore, A Company at the Edge. As the story unfolds, you'll encounter a number of individuals. While I won't delve into extensive detail about every person involved, I will highlight key figures to ensure clarity, particularly for those less familiar with Commodore's history. Let's start with Jack Tramiel. He was the founder and CEO of Commodore and ultimately the person calling the shots. A World War II survivor, Tramiel ran Commodore with a style that could be described as both harsh and, well, let's say dynamic. He wasn't shy about expressing his dissatisfaction if someone wasn't performing up to par. In fact, employees knew that a loud critical outburst was often referred to as a Jack attack. He was known for setting seemingly impossible goals, but those who succeeded in meeting them were brought into his inner circle. Some might even say his management style had a touch of the mafia boss. And there's Chuck Peddle. Before joining Commodore, Peddle was developing CPUs at Motorola. He then moved to MOS technology, where he spearheaded the creation of the affordable 6500 CPU family and the KIM-1 computer. Steve Wozniak even consulted with Peddle during the development of the Apple I. When Commodore acquired MOS technology, Peddle found himself at the company. He was actually considering leaving, but Commodore executives listened to his vision and gave him the opportunity to establish the Commodore Computer Division. This led to the creation of the Commodore PET. Peddle was a key figure heading up computer research and development, with strong ideas about the company's direction. Next we have the West Coast team, led by Chuck Peddle, who were instrumental in developing the new color PET. This group was incredibly diverse, boasting expertise from CPU development all the way to software. Key figures within this team include Bill Seiler, the hardware designer, and John Figgins, who designed and adapted the core system, the kernel, and BASIC. East Coast engineers were based at the original MOS technology in West Chester, Pennsylvania. This team was responsible for the production and design of the chips. Their expertise primarily lay in hardware and chip design. Al Charpentier designed the first version of the VIC chip for video games back in 1977. We have Michael Tomsic, who started as Jack Tramiel's assistant and self-promoted himself to a kind of product management role for the VIC-20. He maintained communication with the Japanese team and later influenced the marketing strategy. To fully understand the story, we need a little background on Commodore. They started out manufacturing all sorts of office supplies, everything from mechanical calculators to office furniture. They were hit by Hewlett-Packard during the price wars in the electronic calculator market. To reduce production cost, Commodore acquired the chip manufacturer MOS technology. This acquisition gave Chuck Peddle the opportunity to develop the PET series, which were some of the first successful, mass-produced personal computers that were constantly being improved. Peddle's team then set out to create a color machine called the Other Intellect, or TOI, with the ability to display 80 characters per line, but they hit some roadblocks. The reasons were complex and varied. Some say that MOS technology couldn't produce the necessary chips. Others felt the plans were too ambitious, and some argued that there wasn't enough fast RAM available. There was even disagreement between the engineers on the East and West coasts. Ultimately, they just weren't making enough progress. This lack of progress created tension between Tramiel and Peddle, leading to a disagreement about the best path forward. Chuck Peddle firmly believed that Commodore should focus on producing and improving business machines. If he had been right, we might all be using Commodore instead of IBM-compatible machines today. A pivotal decision was made in April 1980 at a management meeting in England. After a lengthy debate, Tramiel made his vision clear. He saw the primary threat as the inexpensive Japanese machines that were emerging and wanted to prevent them from dominating the market. His plan was straightforward. We need to build computers for the masses, not for the classes. Meanwhile, a young engineer at MOS Technology named Robert Yanes, after seeing the ZX80, decided to build his own machine. He believed he could create something based on VIC chip far superior to the simple yet innovative ZX. The old guard East Coast engineers, Al Charpentier and Charles Winterball, helped Yanes refine his design. Together with their boss, they saw an opportunity to take the lead on developing the new machine on the East Coast. So, when Tramiel was visiting, they surprised him with a demonstration of their prototype. Tramiel was impressed and ordered them to prepare several units for display at the Consumer Electronics Show CES in June. Chuck Peddle was also present at this impromptu demonstration and, understandably, felt disappointed and critical of the decision. However, he wasn't about to give up without a fight. The West Coast team quickly assembled a counter-prototype, codenamed the G-Job. With only 2 weeks until CES, they raced to create a working machine that supported color and BASIC. Bill Seiler literally sawed a Commodore PET motherboard in half, replacing the display section with the VIC chip. John Figgins adapted the PET ROM to the new machine and rewrote it to handle color. Peddle also contributed by adjusting the tape loading routines. He accommodated the changed timings, allowing them to load programs copied from the PET. At the Consumer Electronics Show in the summer of 1980, Commodore was able to showcase 2 different prototypes. The East Coast team essentially took their existing machine, put it in a presentable case, and wrote a demo that loaded from ROM. Peddle's team, on the other hand, had a more functional machine, but it was just crammed into an old calculator case with a sticker covering an unnecessary hole. They literally used cardboard to hold everything together, resulting in a technically superior but aesthetically challenged machine. Tramiel's strategy of pitting the 2 teams against each other proved effective. By showcasing both machines, he was able to gauge the market's reaction, which was overwhelmingly positive. While the West Coast team's prototype was technically better, the color PET was still not ready for prime time. This led to Chuck Peddle receiving his own jack attack, even though it was not 100% his fault, as the MOS team hadn't provided the necessary chip. Consequently, Tramiel favored the East Coast team, believing their machine was closer to being production ready. The reality was that actual development had only just begun. Tramiel gave them just 6 weeks to prepare for mass production, a task that ultimately fell to Robert "Bob" Russell. As a relatively inexperienced engineer, Russell lacked the necessary expertise, but he had a valuable asset. His office was close to Moore Park, allowing him to consult with the West Coast engineers. Furthermore, Russell had another trump card: Jack Tramiel's support. Leveraging his Tramiel Jolly Joker, Peddle's group had to contribute to the VIC-20 project. It's hard to understand how Commodore operated at times. It's crucial to recognize that Tramiel's backing was more valuable than any official title within the company. Peddle wasn't thrilled when he discovered that Seiler and Figgins were working on the new machine while they were assigned to the Other Intellect or TOI project. Unsurprisingly, the machine they developed looked more like a hybrid of the G-Job prototype and the PET than the East Coast's machine. A close examination of the memory allocation and basic code reveals a clear connection. In parallel with the hardware design, planning for the market launch was also underway. Tramiel's initial plan was to target the Japanese market first, so a meeting was organized with Tony Tokai and Yash Terakura. They returned to Japan in July 1980 with a freshly completed prototype and the responsibility of bringing the project to fruition. Chuck Peddle was pleased with this development, as it freed him from the VIC-20 project and allowed him to focus on the TOI. The Japanese were responsible for finalizing the hardware, designing the PCB, preparing the machine for production, and designing the case. Tramiel intervened at 2 key points. He insisted on a proper keyboard and decided to use 1 kilobyte static RAM chips for the memory, simply because Commodore had a large inventory of them. Peddle's team continued to support their Japanese colleagues, which was a logical move. Peddle even personally contributed to the project, as he was the only one who fully understood the code for cassette storage. The VIC-20 also inherited several features from the TOI, including the separation of the kernel and BASIC and the serial floppy port. However, Pedal's hope of returning to the TOI project was shattered when Tramiel liquidated the West Coast Development Group the day after a private conversation. Tramiel intended to teach his rebellious engineer a lesson. The members of the closed office were given the option to relocate or leave the company. Pedal chose to resign. From Tramiel's perspective, he had successfully quelled the rebellion. The former West Coast team members went on to found a new company called Sirius Systems Technology. Tramiel sued them as he had done in other cases. Commodore's future developments were now solely the responsibility of the East Coast engineers. At the same time, the shift to Japan opened up new opportunities for others. One of those people was Michael Tomczyk, who had previously served as Tramiel's assistant. He was an early supporter for the VIC-20, and following the meeting in England, he compiled a detailed outline of the expectations for the machine. Despite being relatively new to the company, he was deeply interested in product management. When development shifted to the Far East, he was appointed as the primary point of contact, making him a central hub for information. On top of technical tasks, Tony Tokai and Yash Terakura also undertook two other crucial responsibilities. As with any computer, having the right software was essential. To address this, they enlisted the help of young enthusiasts who gravitated towards the Japanese office. These talented individuals ported dozens of high-quality games for the, admittedly, less than stellar hardware. The second key initiative was to challenge Japanese manufacturers in their own market. The VIC-20 was initially launched in Japan under the name VIC-1001. Tramiel aimed to become Japanese and aggressively attack the competition on their homeland. This strategy was driven by necessity, as Irving Gould, the company's primary owner, was reluctant to make further investments. Tramiel funded the project by selling off various departments, strategically using the proceeds to gradually enter the market. In addition to the strategic advantage, launching in the smaller Japanese market allowed them to manage initial inventory costs more effectively than in the US. Beyond raising capital for the US launch, they also focused on marketing. Tomczyk successfully persuaded Tramiel to establish a small team dedicated to launching the VIC-20 in the United States. Tomczyk had to build this team from scratch, as Tramiel had fired the existing marketing staff after criticizing their abilities. It was another megaton-size jack attack. However, Tramiel didn't fully approve of Tomczyk's initial plan, deeming it not friendly enough, which resulted in another jack attack. I think you may understand why I said Tramiel had his own strange leadership style. Ultimately, they partnered with William Shatner, best known for his role in Star Trek, to promote the machine, which was also made available in major retail chains.
Why buy just a video game from Atari or Intellivision? Invest in the wonder computer of the 1980s for under $300, the Commodore VIC-20. Unlike games, it has a real computer keyboard. With the Commodore VIC-20, the whole family can learn computing at home. Plays great games, too. Under $300, the wonder computer of the 1980s, the Commodore VIC-20. Coming soon.
Thanks to a well-executed campaign and competitive pricing, the accessible machine quickly became a major success. With the VIC-20 now on the market, Tramiel recognized that it was only a temporary solution. Development of its successor began almost immediately, with the goal of unveiling it at the CES in January 1982. But, as they say, that's a story for another time.
So here's the box of the VIC-20, the friendly computer. This is from the USA, and it is a quite early model. Let me open it and I show you what is inside the box. The box itself is quite big. I have few cards, a booklet, I'll come back to this one, cable, and the VIC-20 itself. This VIC-20 was called as VC-20 in Germany, but as I told you, this is a model from the US. I can identify it based on the PSU itself. It is also in the box, and based on the sticker, because it is written here 117 voltage. So this is the computer itself. If you know C64, then there is no surprise. The machine itself really looks like a C64. The keyboard is similar to the later PET models. So what you can see is really a good keyboard. I really appreciate it. The feeling is very similar to the early C64 models. The connectors are also well known. It has a single joystick port, an on-off, and this one is the AC. So this is where I can connect the PSU. The PSU itself is a little brick, so it is not the same as the C64. The newer models are sharing the PSU with the C64. What else do we have here at the backside? So this is where I can connect those cartridges. So I can just take this big cartridge and connect it. I have also a connector for the floppy drive and one to connect the monitor and sound. The pinout is the same as the C64, and because of these similarities, it is very easy to start up with this computer because the video cable is the same as the C64, and I can use any of the floppy drives, for example the 1541. There are two more ports. There's one for the cassette tape, and there is another port where, well, I have never used this one. I have a modem for the VIC-20, but to be honest, I never utilized this one. Otherwise, this machine is quite neat, and I have several programs for that one. So what kind of games do I have? This is from Hong Kong, the Avenger, Gorf, Radar Red Race, Jupiter Lander, Visible Solar System, Mole Attack, Omega Race, and Clowns. Why do I have so many cartridges? I think it is because of the low amount of memory of this computer. The 5 kilobyte of memory was hardly enough for any kind of games or programs. So there were two solutions. Either someone had to expand the memory, so insert the memory expander and then load programs from cassette or floppy disk drive, or the other solution was to use these kind of game cartridges or program cartridges. Inside these cartridges there are most of the time 8 or 16 kilobytes of ROM, and since the program is running from the cartridge, the 5 kilobyte memory is enough for the screen and to load the variables. When I'm talking about the 5 kilobyte, I have to note that this 5 kilobyte is shared between the screen and all the sound and the program. So when I'm turning on this computer, I have around just 3 kilobytes of memory for the programs and the data itself, which is quite tight. Let me remove the cartridges and let's talk about a little bit more about the hardware. I have a nice picture from the PCB and you can see it is not very crowded. There is the VIC chip, which is responsible for the sound and the video. It is using a 6502 CPU, similar to the PAT. What is interesting, the PCB contains at least partially the power supply. During the production, they simplified the machine, and this power supply part was removed from the computer. It was done because of two things. First of all, they removed heat dissipation from the case. The first batch had an overheating problem. Later on, they modified the cooling, but the real solution was simply that they just removed the PSU from the case. But there was also the cost aspect. Simply, it was cheaper to produce a separated power supply and a simplified computer. If we compare the PCBs of the early and the later models, then the size reduction is immediately visible. And when we are talking about production price, then size matters. When they launched the VIC-20, it was the first computer, the first color computer, with a price tag less than $300. They made it a very smart way because they introduced multiple things for the computer. I already mentioned the modem, but the floppy drive was much more important. But there was a hardware glitch in the VIC-20, and because of that, they had to slow down the communication between the floppy drive and the VIC-20. Of course, this hardware issue was repaired, but I don't know why, but they kept this communication protocol even for the C64. I think it was because of the compatibility, because that way if someone just replaced the VIC-20 with a C64, then he could reuse the floppy drive. But unfortunately, because of that, the communication between the C64 and the floppy disk had the same speed as the VIC-20. For the VIC-20 it was not as a big issue because of the small memory, so there was no big program to load or unload. But for the C64, well, we had to wait a lot for the floppy disk, or the other solution was to use different kind of turbo programs. I put aside this booklet, but I think it was one of the reasons why the VIC-20 was so successful. Multiple of these were produced by the VIC Commando, which was founded by Tom Zik. The truth is that they really put together an easy to use and from ground up to really to technical details. So many of those booklets are starting from the basics and giving a real insight of the computer. And it is not just a technical documentation. What is really important, anyone who could read could start from the basics. Yeah, the basic. And then continue through those booklets up to a real programmer. And it shows me that they really wanted to produce a computer for the masses, not for the classes. So really not just for engineers or technicians, but for kids, for everyone. Many people think that this computer was based on a console chip, so it was just a gaming machine. But really, they really put a lot of effort to teach almost anybody programming. They really wrote a lot about the hardware. So for me, it means it was not a gaming machine, it was really a home computer. There was one more factor for the success. But how can we measure it was a successful machine? First of all, millions of these computers were produced, and it was the first one where the production number exceeded 1 million of the same unit. Okay, it had different names because it was VIC-1001 in Japan, VIC-20 in the US, or False Computer 20 in Germany. But how could they sell so many of these? The hardware itself was not a stellar one. Atari or the Texas Instrument 99, those were better machines. That's true, but this machine had a very nice price tag. After the C64 introduction, the price of the computer was reduced even further. In the last production year, the price tag went under $100. There was a price war between Commodore and Texas Instruments, where this little machine killed the concurrency. It was Tramiel's revenge because of the calculator war. If I need to summarize this machine, it is not very hard. Tramiel's slogan, Commodore for the masses, not for the classes, really describes what is in the box. It is not a stellar machine. It has just 5 kilobytes of memory. When they started to design it, it was a kind of accidental design. It was not decided in advance. There was a war inside Commodore. And this is when Commodore changed its way from business machines to being the biggest supplier of home computers. They introduced in multiple steps, first in Japan, then in the US, and then internationally. A new manager, Michael Tomzik, was responsible for the computer marketing strategy. It was the friendly computer with its friendly computer guide, a computer which was really affordable. It was not the best computer, but it was very, very cheap. At the end of its lifespan, it really killed the concurrency, simply driving out Texas Instruments from the market and also bankrupting Atari. Is it a good machine? I don't think so, but if I check out the price, well, the price performance was really great. And it paved the way for the C64. I hope you enjoyed this long video. Join me for the next time. And as usual, let me play a little bit around. Goodbye.